are on virtual discussion series, and this is on wedding design. We have a few other series coming up, so here are the other series: roadmap through wedding stationery and signage, photography, and entertainment. And here is a little blurb on our wedding design in and outs, but we'll get more into that later on. And meeting our vendors. So welcome everybody to the virtual discussion series. I am Danielle of Danielle Caldwell Events, and I am here with Jordan of Blum, Design and Flowers, Jessica of Jessica Hill Photography, and Sherine of Vintage Meets Modern Event Rentals to discuss the topic of wedding design. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. If you have any questions during the discussion, type them into the comments section of the event, and we will try to answer them either during or after the discussion. This session, along with others, is being recorded. So if you need to jump off at any time or you can't make the rest of this session or other sessions, we will be able to share it with you later on Instagram TV. And as I just mentioned, we have 3 other talks taking place later this month. At this time, I am going to stop sharing this, and I am going to introduce everybody to all the vendors that we have here. So first, we have Jordan, owner of Blum Design and Flowers, or Blum Design and Flowers. Jordan, I always screw that up. Jordan's floral design career began when she started working at a small flower shop while studying art history at Willamette University. Intensive floral design studies followed that in Los Angeles, Portland, and London, England, before landing an internship in London. From there, she worked in Boston before returning back to us in the Pacific Northwest and opened Blum in 2005. Blum has received numerous accolades and has been published in multiple blogs and magazines. When not working, she loves to travel. Jessica of Jessica Hill Photography has been working with couples since 2001 and still loves nothing more than looking through her lens and documenting moments. She has a BFA in photography from University of Michigan, numerous accolades including Oregon Bride Best of Portland Photographer of 2018 and finalist in 2019. She has multiple publications and over 15 years of experience. Sherine is the owner and stylist at Vintage Meets Modern, exceptional client service, quality trend-setting event rentals. That's what you get when you work with Sherine at Vintage Meets Modern. They can help you elevate your wedding from the planning and designing experience all the way to your big day. Expect to wow your guests. Sherine hasn't always been a stylist, didn't start off as a stylist, but design and creativity were always part of her life. Before opening Vintage Meets Modern and venturing into event rentals, she worked as a marketing director, shaping brands, company culture, and designing corporate events. Sherine lives in Portland with her husband, 2 munchkins, and a puppy named Lily. And finally, me. I have been in this industry since 2007. I have a bachelor's in business administration from UNCC, a certificate in meeting and events from NYU, and a CMP. I have other stuff as well, but you know, I just love education for whatever reason. I started my full-time career in New York City planning corporate conferences for hedge funds and asset managers, worked at the Scottsdale Fairmont Scottsdale Princess, which is a 5-diamond, 5-star resort. I also worked here at Lewis and Clark College. In 2016-17, I decided it was time to follow my passion and dreams and created Danielle Caldwell Events. I also love to travel with my kids and my husband, volunteer, work out, and now garden because I can't produce an event for another year. Anyway, now that you know who we are, I want to get to the topic of wedding design. During this talk, we are going to focus on future events, bring some normalcy back into this world. However, all the points that we will be discussing today can honestly be used in any current micro wedding or for future events. So anyway, let's dive into this. The one question that I typically always get when somebody is interested in wedding design is, what is your process? And will you walk me through all the different elements? Short answer, yes. we will walk you through the process. But to be honest with you, your entire vendor team works at this together. And that is the reason I have pulled these three amazing women onto this discussion, because we integrate all of our work together to produce something amazing for you. So what I would love to do is start with Jordan, because when I meet with a client, yes, we go over, you know, their budgets, we're determining colors, we're establishing a blueprint, we're exploring mood boards, and a lot of times doing a walkthrough to establish a layout. But some of the first people that we bring on to the vendor team is your florist, a lot of times your photographer, and then rentals. And honestly, all of this is so intertwined. So Jordan, when you meet with your new potential client, what are some of the things that you like to find out first?
I think that it's fun when we meet new clients, and specifically when we talk about weddings, because each client walks into that first meeting a little different. And we have some people that walk in and, I mean, total kind of rookie. They've never planned really any event. Maybe there's somebody who hasn't really thought about their wedding for very long, and they're not even really sure what they want. Sometimes we have clients that walk in on the other end of the spectrum, and they love to throw parties, and they have a very distinct vision. So I think that's the very first thing, is just kind of understanding how much guidance somebody wants, and versus how much of it's going to just be sort of me listening and then shaping and molding a little bit. So that first conversation, whether right now we're doing almost all of those on the phone or on Zoom, and then down the road, hopefully we'll be meeting again in person. But it's really just kind of talking through your thoughts, your feelings, the mood you want to have for the day, the formality for the day. Some people have a theme, but almost everyone has a general feeling for what they want that day to be like. And that may not be particularly floral specific, but that definitely helps with the whole direction of what I'm going to propose to you. And similarly, before people meet with me, it's the things that are good that you really need to know when your wedding's going to happen, because that's going to determine not only the types of flowers that are going to be available for us to use, but so much of just the setting and the feeling and the vibe for the whole day, and then where it's going to happen. Because if it's going to be indoors versus outdoors, whether it's going to be a super formal ballroom versus a very elegant but still relaxed vineyard, all of these things play into it. So we kind of just flush out all of those general concepts. And then down the road, we get into more of the nitty gritty, really specific details. Mm-hmm. So I think the good thing to know is just when you first start out, don't walk into that meeting feeling like you need to know everything. You shouldn't know everything. And just to be open to feedback and conversation, and to have the fun of starting to use your imagination and get creative on where you want that day to feel like.
No, totally. I mean, the thing is I even have some clients that come to me and say, like, who would you recommend for a photographer, or what would you recommend for this or that? And, you know, in talking to you in the past, one thing that I love is that you really take all those details in. You do want to know who that photographer is, what kind of mood that they're going to set, because, you know, kind of bringing Jessica into this, everybody has a different style, you know, and there is, and I don't want to dive too much down the rabbit hole because we're actually doing a whole section on photography, but there is digital, there is film, and, you know, some people have different lenses and everything else, and that can really change how your florals look, especially depending upon the type of venue and the type of lighting.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's sort of two really important things for a wedding when you're talking about design. You have the in the moment, how it feels on that day, but equally as important is how you look back on that day and how you feel. And so it's important to just be conscientious of, does one of those things matter more to you? Or do they matter equally? Or is it more, I want to have more time and more energy into creating like highly stylized photograph moments?
Right.
Because that's where we can kind of play with, is it more important for you to have a beautiful like head table detail, or is it more important for you to have like a big backdrop that's going to be in all of your images? So just something that's kind of fun to think of and be conscientious of, so that you're equally excited on the day of, as well as 10 years down the road when you're looking back on it.
Well, I mean, that also brings up the whole point of like, even when you're talking wedding design, the two constraints that even as planners that we always face is number one, budget, because
Mhm.
every single event has a different one,
Mhm.
and time, because in all honesty, like it's not even about, your timeline for the day of, it is what your venue can do. If you want to have a wedding starting at 4 o'clock, but your venue's not going to allow you in until a certain time. Yes, in theory, we can make anything happen, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, everything can happen. And, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, what is one thing that you wish that your clients knew about behind the scenes on their wedding day that, like, once you really got into it, what is one thing?
I wish people were able to take, I think whenever you talk to bride, and I feel like the most common advice that people always give somebody is like, take a moment on the day to just really feel it and be aware of it. And I think with floral, one of the really beautiful things is how many hands have touched those flowers, from literally the person that planted the seeds on a farm in Holland to packaging them and shipping them here, and then the wholesalers are unwrapping them, and then we get them in our studio and we process them, we arrange them, and then we set them up on site. And it's a really incredible collaboration, just within the floral world itself. I mean, not even amongst all of us is another collaboration, but it's really incredible. And a lot of times I've had my staff bring it up. Like, we'll stand back at the end of the way, like a setup before we're leaving, and it's like, there are 15,000 flowers in this room, and each one of those was probably touched by 12 people all over the world. And it's just a really, really cool, kind of overwhelming at times things to think about, but just makes it that much more special. It's really neat.
Oh, I 100% agree. I mean, even thinking of like the food that's served there and all the hands and
Yeah, and I guess similarly would be, I hope that clients know, I think all wedding vendors, but I'll speak for myself and my team specifically. It's like, we put so much heart into our events, and I think there's so much like good energy and warmth. And I hope that clients know that too, that like, I have never met a wedding vendor who doesn't, like, I get emotional, but it's like, who doesn't truly do this because they want their clients to be happy. Um, so I hope that they can feel that when they walk into that room or that space, and know that like, we're doing this for you because we want you to have that reaction when you walk in.
well, it's the energy you get from, the actual production of it and being like, wow, this is really awesome. This all came together that,
Yeah.
carries on to the next person, the next person.
Yeah.
Um, well, I'm going to jump to Sherine,
Yeah.
because part of obviously wedding design is your rentals. And, now we've established a florist. We probably are at this point going to do some sort of walkthrough of the venue to say, hey, like, what is the layout that we should be using based on the attendees and everything else, and the flow that the client wants. And event rentals is the biggest thing that comes into it at that point. So, Sherine, what floor plan or wedding design tips can you offer clients from a rental company perspective?
I'd say so. One thing that I really, really like to point out to my clients is, and something they might be forgetting about, is creating mingling spaces. There's so many different opportunities throughout the timeline of a wedding day to create a mingling space. For example, pre-ceremony or post-ceremony, you could have cocktail hour. And so our rentals come into play. For example, you can have bar tables with bar chairs or without, bar tables for standing and mingling room while they're drinking their cocktails, or even having a lounge area for like sit down mingling space. And then those two things can translate really well for after the wedding and during the reception. So say cocktail hour's over, now we've eaten, the dance floor is going, let's create another opportunity for your guests to find each other and mingle, as opposed to just stay at their seat at the table. So you can really bring in some really beautiful, very well designed lounges that can really make it kind of bring your overall look together. You've got your flowers, you've got your venue. Now make sure your rentals are also playing a part in bringing that aesthetic to life and creating mingling spaces at the same time.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I feel like mingling spaces is a new thing. Like whether or not you want to incorporate it in your ceremony, or especially after you've had that amazing meal and you're just wanting to enjoy everybody on the dance floor, and having that opportunity to be part of it, but not killing your feet or actually taking that breath and being comfortable. But it's and Shirine's, for those of you who haven't been on Vintage Meets Modern's website, Sherine has so many amazing rentals, whether it be bars. You have actually a few new bars that you've brought out, and backsplashes and everything else for different ceremony types. She not to be free marketing for you, but you have amazing stuff. So on that,
thanks.
I always love using your stuff. So what would you say sets you apart from other rental companies? Because there are other major ones out here, but they're much different from you. So what sets you apart?
I think for me, it started with like this one goal, and that was to just bring something different to Portland event industry market, and that it, that it has to be high quality and beautiful at the same time. And so we've custom created a lot of our inventory. We're the first ones to bring white tables to Portland rental market. Our tables are custom made and are white lacquer. They're very modern and clean. We also custom made our farm tables, but they're modern farm tables. They're not rustic. So it's just always, for me, it's like trying to find a little hole in the industry where I could come in and bring something different. Also, what I love to do is lounges. So I have this whole section on our website that's called Rent This Look. So part of it for me is whether or not you have a wedding planner. I mean, I can make your life a little easier. You can just, browse through the different looks that we have on the website, and you can just pick that. Like, okay, and then we bring it in, we set it up, and we'll even set up the tabletop decor and everything. So it's just a complete package deal. Or you can say, I love this look, but can you change this out or that out? So it's a good starting point.
Yeah, and I mean, to kind of dive off of that too, there is wedding designers, and there's also wedding planners, and I think it's really important to realize that there is a distinct difference between the two at the same time. I mean, wedding planners, we are helping you grasp all the actual vendors that you need, whether it is the florist or the photographer or the videographer or the rentals. And some of my clients have literally rented from 6 or 7 places, whether they wanted, the linens from La Tavla or from Creative Coverings, and then they wanted, a certain flatware from Party Place, and then they wanted a certain glassware or whatnot from Bridgewood Events, and then they're getting something from you, and then they're getting something from this other. And I'm like, okay, so all these different pieces. And I mean, the fact is you being a designer at Vintage Meets Modern, you are walking them through all your different pieces, which is super important, something that I don't specialize in at all. But then you're not the one making sure that all these other pieces are covered and are being coordinated and everything else. I mean, that's a whole different. So just because your role is just as important as mine, just in different ways. And I think that some clients don't really realize that. They don't know how to utilize each piece of the puzzle to really create their masterpiece. So
well, that's the neat thing about this industry, is that we all get to work together and we all have our own, you know, things that we're really good at. And then the things we're like, please no, someone else take this on, like planning.
she was born for all that craziness. I'm just born to show you like how to make this upscale. So kind of like I was asking Jordan, what is one thing that you wish your clients knew about the behind the scenes of their wedding day?
So one thing I always ask about, and people just usually don't think about it unless they have an awesome planner like you, and that is staggering their deliveries. It's happened so many times where we show up at the time we're supposed to show up at, and yet there's like 2 other trucks waiting to use the same loading dock. So that's just one thing to think about. Please stagger your deliveries. Don't make us all fight for that space, because we have other deliveries on the same day, you know, so it's just, yeah.
Yeah, no, timelines, that kind of feeds into the whole timeline thing, which, you know, they don't realize. And, you know, it all depends, especially your venue can make or break that completely. And we'll dive into that a little bit more. But I do want to get to Jessica, because it's funny. Photography is like the one between that and videography. That is how you remember your special day, besides the memories you have in your brain, which, you know, become cloudier and cloudier as you get, you know, older and everything else. But photography is what allows us to just reimagine everything all over again, whether it's a year later on our first anniversary, or 10 or 20 or 30 years later, however long it is. But and the thing is photography is normally one of the first things, or at least for my clients, that they go after, sometimes even before picking their venue, which I find a little bit backwards, but that's okay. But Jessica, like, what for you, like, what is one of the things that you wish your clients knew? Like, for when you sign on a client, what are your steps that you go through?
Well, thanks for having me on this talk, Danielle, firstly. I love that we're all just conversing, because we don't normally get to do this, and we're bringing a little bit of normalcy back to the very, very upside down wedding industry right now. So I love just having a talk about like weddings and how joyful they are and how beautiful they can be and how well designed they can be and how thoughtful the florals are and how many miles those flowers go and how mingling spaces can really make your wedding into something really great, and how timing is all like so important, and your vendor relations and the communication with all your vendors as a planner. So I just wanted to say thank you, and you guys know how much I love this industry. So in regards to what I want couples to know is I think that the one thing, like you were saying, Danielle, that people take with them is, you know, when you have the rentals and these are beautiful spaces, they have to be returned to the warehouse. You know, the florals unfortunately wither away, and the dress gets pressed and cleaned and then put into a box, only to be opened maybe decades later. So the one lasting thing from the wedding day are the photographs. And so I feel so much joy that that's the gift that I can give. It's such an honor, truly. But when you look back in 10, 15, 20, 30 years, I want those photos to be extremely timeless. There are so many film-like or Instagram filters that make the photos very trendy, and they're very hip looking. Trust me, they are. And they're very maybe rust colored or orange, very 70s vibes, or maybe really grainy, or maybe really, really dark and moody, because that's a really cool look. Those are trends and they will fade. Your wedding photos, when you look back at them in 30, 40 years, I want you to remember what the color of the grass was that day, or the color of the sky at sunset. Like, everything does come and go. And I've been a wedding photographer now for almost, 2 decades. So going into 20 years as a professional wedding photographer. And so I've actually seen these trends come and go. And my goal as an artist is to make timeless art so that when you look back on it and you remember what the mingling space looked like, you're going to remember that beautiful dark green velvet couch, or those beautiful ranunculus or roses that were in your bouquet, and the way that they smelled, and the way that the band sounded, and the temperature of the air, all of those things, bringing all of the senses together. I mean, you're in that moment and you're walking through that space, but what about when you look back on it? I want you to just be transfixed right back into your wedding day when you look back at those photos. So that's my number one priority as an artist.
No, that's awesome. And I mean, I know that I touched on this before, and I know that we as a group have touched on it before, but I know that when it comes to photography and when it even comes to how that event looks later on in the photos, you know, kind of like when you're trying to figure out how to design your house and how to pick that perfect paint color for the wall. I mean, the fact is light, the actual room itself, windows, what you have around it, all that stuff has input on how that color reflects in the lens and how it's going to develop later on. And so, you know, knowing what kind of photographer, and knowing that you have a certain style, and knowing that, you know, Jordan in her own specialty is trying to put together these flowers based on whether it's a color palette or a mood board or even a Pinterest board for some of our brides and grooms. You know, when, you know, Jordan, you were even, and I don't want to speak for you, but, you know, how does that impact the way you decide to design or that proposal that you're going to put forward to the client?
It's a big thing to consider, because as I was saying, you have so often on the day of your wedding, you're really kind of overwhelmed with your senses, and your main focus is going to be oftentimes more to talk to people and to connect in those relationships, which makes sense and it should be, and that's beautiful in its own way. But so often I feel like our memories become kind of one in one with like the photographs and the images. Like I know when I think back on my childhood, I'm not sure oftentimes if I really remember that moment or if it's the photograph of that moment that I remember. And so when I have a client that comes to me and they say this is their absolute favorite shade of peach and they just love it, and it's like, we have to have this color, but if it's orange, that's going to be super cringy for them. It's important for me to know what style of photographer that they have, so that yes, it's that shade of peach in real life, but it's also that shade of peach in the images, so that I don't get a phone call or an email in 8 weeks saying, what happened? I thought we had figured it out. So it's a really important thing. And if it is a photographer who alters colors, which there's nothing wrong with that, it's definitely an aesthetic and a style, and it can be gorgeous. But it is important for me to know who your photographer is, so that we can have that thought and that discussion beforehand to make sure that there are no surprises or disappointments either on the day of or down the road. So, and I think it's really fun that, like, usually when we have these design meetings, I don't feel like the photographer is always included in it, even though obviously photography is a fine art form. But for weddings, it's such an integral part of it, because it is so much of the memory, and it's a visual. It's just part of that whole visual experience.
Yeah, and I mean, also, so as I was mentioning before, one of the processes that I love taking my clients through is a mock-up. And that mock-up can either happen in the venue itself, which I actually prefer, but it's not always, you know, the case depending upon the situation, or it's happening in a rental, like whether it be Party Place or Bridgewood. Or sometimes, I've never done one in Vintage Meets Modern, but I'm sure we could do it there. And the thing is the reason why those are so important is because design isn't just about seeing something online. Like, you can look at a million things online, and let's be realistic, that linen is not going to be the same when you're going to see it in person. There's always going to be some color variance to it or texture or whatnot. And when we're dealing with anything via design, you know, it's all your senses. You know, it's how it feels. It's how something smells. It's, you know, the color, you know, what that brings to everything. And your rentals, whether it is your charger, your plate, your napkins, your linen, you know, the type of container that you're putting your flowers into, whether it's a high or low arrangement, all that stuff really makes an impact on your actual design. And therefore, that is also impacting how it's going to photograph later on. A lot of times I bring not only the rental company, but the florist and literally every rental we can possibly think of that might go with it. And I call it playtime because we're literally playing around to see like what really looks good. But the thing is depending upon if you wanted to choose like Shirine's stuff, which, you know, the white lacquer or your farm tables, all that stuff, gorgeous as it is, it changes drastically how something looks, especially when you have whether you're in an indoor venue or in an outdoor venue, because the light changes it all. And sometimes, you know, it's impossible in all honesty to picture it unless you're actually seeing it in real life. And I think all those different steps that we take really make or break a design in the long run. So Jessica, what is important for you as far as a timeline? And I know that Sherine had brought this up before, and it is like your timeline. I swear, I think my timelines for my clients go through like 10, sometimes 20 edits, depending upon how much of a production that wedding is. And we've all been in that production before. But for you, Jessica, like what's really important for you as far as that timeline?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that's important is having enough time for getting ready. Even if you're like, oh, I don't need a whole bunch of photos of my dress hanging in a window. Yeah, I agree. But I also think that full hour, I ask for a full hour usually of getting ready before the first look at a minimum of an hour. I would probably love an hour and a half to 2. But during that first hour, I'm basically getting to know all of the bridesmaids and groomsmen, and they're starting to feel familiar with me. So they're allowing themselves to be photographed and not freeze up deer in headlight style, as we all do, including myself, when a camera is raised. So not only am I photographing, say, the invitations, the rings, yes, the dress, but I'm also photographing candids of all the groomsmen, bridesmaids, all hanging out, having fun, and really familiarizing myself with them. And then they get to know me and I get to know them, you know, and then by the time all of the formal photos come around, they feel a lot more comfortable with me to be more candid, to be more vulnerable in front of the camera. So I think that's a really important one. The second one is definitely having enough time for couples portraits and family photos. Family photos, if you have big families, if you have brother, sister-in-laws, and they have a whole bunch of kids, if you have divorced family and you've got stepmom, stepdad, those things take a lot of time. And there also is a little bit of like finesse and, you know, care that is given to those photos. So, you know, usually having photos take place beforehand. I love to get all the photos taken care of beforehand, but there is something to be said for it feeling less stressed after the ceremony. So I always kind of recommend a longer cocktail hour. If you can get away with an hour and a half long cocktail hour, I always recommend that, because then it gives us plenty of time to do the family photos. And then you can also mingle, and I'm getting candids. Also during that time, I think that, like what you were mentioning, Jordan and Sherine, you guys were all talking about how there's so much that goes into setting up the mingling spaces, to setting up these beautiful floral installations. And then the couple doesn't even see it, because by the time they get into that room, they've been taking photos, you know, they've been mingling. So when you do open up that cocktail hour a little longer, you have the opportunity to go and do a walkthrough of the empty ballroom or tent or, you know, vineyard, where have you. to really see it and take it all in. And I like being there for that because I'm photographing basically this vision come to life, which is awesome. So I really also think that sunset photos are really important. I actually don't do tons of couples photos before the ceremony. I always find that the couples photos during that golden hour sunset time are always so magical. The couple's already married. They've already taken all their family photos. They have probably already had a glass of wine or two. So they're feeling frisky. They're feeling so happy and in love and cuddly and maybe a little flirty with each other. So I always get really great photos during that time. So I always even try to shorten the photos at the beginning, pre-ceremony, or even right after until sunset, so that we can really just capture like just gorgeousness. But it's tricky to do. There have been many a sunset that I've missed because, you know, dad got on the mic and his toast ended up being 14 minutes. So Jordan knows what I'm talking about. Yeah. So
Well, I mean, we're talking design, but yes, I mean, the design and planning go hand on hand in a lot of stuff, and that is really like where your timeline becomes key of, you know, what is important to the couple, also to the photographer, because a lot of times the reason why they're choosing that photographer is because of what they produce, and how you produce is based on the normal timeline that you try to go with.
Yep.
And getting those details, I mean, you know, I'm totally about documenting the, you know, the couple and their family. I mean, of course, like that is super, super important. But it's also super important to be documenting your design, because why bother spending all that time on it? I mean, you want a beautiful place to get married. You want a beautiful setting. You want to be able to look back and say, hey, like, look what we were around. Like, we were surrounded by our friends, by our family, by our loved one in this beautiful hotel or vineyard or tent. And, you know, especially when the parents or even the couple turns to me like, I have to spend that much for that. And I'm like, yes, but just think about, you know, this was your vision, and just think about how amazing it's going to look. But again, like that timeline plays hugely important into whether it is making sure you get the sunset photos, whether it is making sure you can load in all your stuff on time. And even like with being a florist, you know, not only is it you having to share the spaces with them or the elevator, but depending upon what kind of, and Jordan, I know you're known for this, but like hanging stuff from the chandeliers, or like all of those installments, all of those take time.
I think that's something that people are oftentimes surprised by when, like, say we're doing the mock-up meeting or the walkthrough, and they actually see their vendor team, how integrated we are when it comes to especially like load-in day, and how we'll work with like a rental company to figure out, should we be doing this stuff the day before? Should we do it at 5 a.m, or do we need to bring an extra large crew and just kind of like get it done in a really, really short timeline? So I think all of those things are super unique to the space. With floral, we always have to think about temperature. So if you're doing your outside wedding, usually that just means we're going to bring a bigger crew and we're going to do it faster. But just know that's just a conversation that we're always going to have, and we have experience with it. And the nice thing about having a crew of vendors who have worked in Portland or worked in that region for quite a while is we know if we're at a certain hotel and it has one very slow freight elevator, to just plan on it. So
it's gonna take forever.
Not something to be overwhelmed by. It's something more to be, I think, comforted when you hear your florist and your rentals and your lighting and your DJ and your band say, and your photographer say, oh yeah, we've shot here a dozen times. Like, we'll do it. Like, don't even worry about it. You worry on having fun with your bridesmaids or your groomsmen, and come back and it's going to be beautiful. And that's kind of all you need to think about.
And also, like, the necessary questions to also be asking your venue. I mean, like, for instance, like, you know, besides the fact of like what they allow, what they don't allow, when can you get in there, when do you have to be broken down, also, are there any hidden passageways? I mean, like, where can I sneak the bride so that she can get that first touch? Where can I sneak the bride through so that she doesn't have to like try to wind through her family, but she wants to see the reception, but she has to race out to get all the shots because they didn't do a first look, which is totally fine. But then you have all those other hoops to jump through. So you're gonna get her out of the ceremony, her and the groom up to see the room, and then back down to sign the marriage license, get them back into the ceremony once everybody's cleared out, and then out so that she can get all the photos before she gets to the reception without taking more than an hour plus to make all that happen. And those are all the things that, you know, we're thinking about while doing all this design and everything else. One thing that also jumped in my brain is how we can, not necessarily going down the rabbit hole of budget and cost savings, but a lot of times, and especially on the weddings I've worked with Jordan on, we have reused certain things from when it goes from the ceremony to the reception because they are beautiful works of art. There's no reason to just pay extra, but that also again plays into the timeline for Jessica. And that also plays into time with your rentals as well. Jordan, do you want to speak on that a little bit or?
Well, I think it's a really good conversation to have about any time that we're setting up separate spaces, to be aware of how might it work to repurpose things, knowing that sometimes it may actually end up costing you more to almost have a stay and repurpose it, because then you're having to pay for all the labor of like moving and resetting. That said, if we can make it work and we can do it in a way that's not disruptive to your guests and your flow of your event, we're not holding up the flow because you have a limited time on this day to absolutely like try to do it and think of ways that we can make it work. So that's definitely always a conversation we try to have early on when we're in that design meeting is how can we make, and really it's just about making the most of everything that we're using to eliminate waste and give you the biggest impact that we can.
Yeah, and I mean, even kind of getting back, and I believe Sherine spoke on this earlier, is, not only not necessarily reusing florals, but like repurposing them in that way. But I mean, I've done the same thing with certain furniture, whether or not you're using that lounge furniture, for people to kind of mingle with before the ceremony. And then depending upon where that reception is, using it as another place for, others that don't want to be around all the loud music. And I totally respect that. But like giving them a place where they can sit and have a really fun cocktail and really mingle and not be at, their dinner table and stuff like that. Those lounge spaces, not only around the dance floor, but in other sections of the room become so key. So yeah. Well, guys, this was a really fun conversation. I mean, we could honestly talk for hours on all this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, we do.
we really do. But yes, I mean, as you guys can see, I mean, there's a lot that goes into event design. It's not just about having somebody pick out your color scheme or whatnot. And yes, we're going to have other talks, whether it be on stationery or signage, what feeds into your event design, different types of entertainment, as well as photography, the differences between digital and film. But I think one major thing that you're seeing is that it's not just about everything that I know, but about how all of these different individuals, all these different creative vendors really just weave together this amazing day for you, and how we are a team, and how, as I said before, each choice that you make, which are, great, they do kind of cause a ripple effect to all the other things. So, whether it be the type of photographer, whether it be the type of rental you chose, how is that going to show up against a certain tablecloth or against, certain flowers or everything else? I mean, doing the layouts, where you really want people dancing, What kind of shapes and tables are you using? Are you using rounds? Are you using long tables? Are you using family style? Are you having buffets? The ability to have different types of centerpieces. You know, the more tables you have, you're probably not going to be using the same centerpieces. You're going to be doing a few highs, a few lows, some sort of candles. And no candles, and Jordan could also speak on this, candles is not always a less expensive option. And you know, fake flowers, or one thing I've heard before is, oh, I'll just get all local flowers. Well, that doesn't mean that your cost is going to be any less either. But we can work out all those details. Is there anything else that you guys would love to say while we're still on? Any last tidbits?
I think just to hopefully the design and the beautiful elements of a wedding is really the icing on the cake. It plays such an important role in the general feeling and the mood of the wedding. But at the end of the day, it's the really fun part. And so I think the value of hiring a good designer, and then good vendors is that hopefully you don't have to sweat all the like little tiny small stuff. You can let us know the things that are really important to you, and you can be as involved or as hands-off as you want to be, and you can be confident that it's going to be a beautiful day that represents you and your relationship and your family, and to just have fun with it, because that's really what it's all about. I mean, and we love it. We want to have fun with you.
Totally.
Yeah, no, I mean, I find that the energy I get from producing something spectacular, and they're all different, but they're all amazing. I mean, that's what drives me to the next thing. And I love when I get mood boards, and it's not just about, you know, getting that Pinterest board and having 50 photos from whatever. I mean, everybody produces such amazing stuff. It's how we can make it unique and holistic and just individual to our certain client to make them come and say, oh my God, you nailed it. You got this. This looks amazing. And sometimes we get even more excited about it depending upon other words that they use with it. But it's like, yep, we did it. All right, when's the next one? How are we going to wow this next client? I think that's what feeds us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a definite adrenaline rush when you get to the end of that setup and you have that happy client. It's really, really fun. And I hope clients know too, I think we're all kind of partying in our own way when we see how happy they are. It's really fun.
That's well said, for sure.
Jessica, Sherine, any closing? Or
I just think this was an awesome convo. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it was great to have you guys.
Yeah, this was fun.
A little bit of normalcy, huh? Now let's get back to producing at some point or another. Well, thank you all. Sherine, Jessica, Jordan, thank you so much for joining me on this. I hope whoever is watching and those that get to watch this, I hope you've gotten a few aspects, a few glimpses into what we want to do for you and what we love to do. And again, we will be having 3 more talks. The next one is on the roadmap of stationery and signage, especially as it relates to indoor and outdoor weddings. We have one on photography, digital versus film. Both are amazing. They're just different. And then the last is on entertainment and all the different entertainment options you can use and how to even intertwine a whole bunch of them into your special day. So thank you again to everybody. And yeah.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.